Dear friends and colleagues, today's topic for discussion is medico-legal aspects of PPH. It takes years to build up a good reputation, but only second, hemorrhage is a well-identified cause of maternal mortality and morbidity and leads to litigations under medical negligence, both in the civil and the criminal courts. It is hence only pertinent that a medical practitioner should safeguard oneself to avoid medico-legal issues. Now, in PPH, there are main 3 points and 3 delays where a person can be litigated against. The first is a delay in diagnosis, the second is a delay in transfer, and the third is a delay in the treatment or management. So let us see a systematic approach to prevent litigations in PPH. So the first part is to identify the risk factors, because a person forewarned is a person forearmed, and to be prepared is half the victory. So first of all, we have to see what are the causative factors for PPH. Then a meticulous history taking, especially of history of coagulopathy, PPH in a previous pregnancy, obesity, and previous cesarean section. Then a thorough examination to rule out multiple pregnancies, hydramnios, placenta previa, abnormal placentations like placenta accreta, increta, and percreta, then uterine inversions, uterine ruptures, and even genital tract traumas. Now, primary PPH is most commonly due to uterine due to retained placental bits, infection, and placental polyp. The second part is the assessment of blood loss, and any loss that makes the woman symptomatic is significant. The risk factors are prolonged second stage of labor and over distension of the uterus due to multiple pregnancy, hydramnios, macrosomic baby, and it can also follow the use of tocolytic agents, instrument assisted delivery, and retained products of conception. So prolonged labor and traumatic instrumental delivery are to be avoided. Active management of the third stage of labor should be instituted. Early detection of abnormal placentation should be done and treated accordingly. And judicious use of uterotonic should be done prophylactically to prevent PPH. Now, when it comes to management, always call for help. The more the merrier, because treating PPH as a team is better than treating it as an individual. Quickly assess the vitals, send blood investigations, arrange for blood transfusion, catheterize the bladder, bimanual uterine compression, and start uterotonics. Then look for completeness of the placenta and the genital tract injuries. This is very important because in UK there have been 2 cases where after a normal delivery and in the second case after a cesarean section, a huge placental mass has been retained in the uterus. And the doctor has had to pay an enormous amount of compensation. Balloon tamponade, the surgical methods of sutures, and stepwise devascularizations. You may also land up in a hysterectomy or even uterine artery embolizations. So there was a case of K. Grace Kutty versus Dr. Annamma Oman, where the complainant alleged gross negligence in a case of a second cesarean for placenta accreta, leading to uncontrolled bleeding after cesarean, and an emergency hysterectomy had to be performed. There was injury to bladder, which also required repair. Now the patient continued bleeding, for which she had to be transferred over to the medical college. Later, she also needed further treatment for a vesicovaginal fistula. Now here the patient was shifted in a taxi to the medical college for further management. And this was one of the allegations of the complainant, that there was a non-transference in an ambulance, and this was imposed on the doctor. But the court rejected it, as this did not lead to any complications. So the state commission held that there was no evidence of negligence, and it was only a lapse. But and here the National Commission also held that the allegations leveled by the complainant were totally unfounded. Now, on the contrary, in Deep Nursing Home versus Manmeet Singh Mattewal, this baby of Charanpreet Kaur died soon after delivery, though there was no fetal distress till the time of delivery. And Charanpreet was told about the death of a just born baby, as a result of which she went into a state of shock. Nursing home was not equipped to do a uterine artery embolization. Blood had not been arranged for blood group had not been ascertained beforehand. So the allegations of the patient were that there was a delayed decision and shifting of Charanpreet to PGI Chandigarh such that on arrival she was declared brought dead, and the complainant sought an enormous amount of compensation from the doctor. Now the doctor said that Charanpreet came to the nursing home for the first time on 10th of November. That was in the third trimester of a pregnancy term. Her EDD was 2nd of January, and she was advised to continue iron and calcium and also asked to undergo a cardiology checkup. On 19th of December and on 21st of December, both days she came with false labor pains. So after discussing the available alternatives with the accompanying relatives, the doctor decided to induce labor pains as the baby was already mature and Charanpreet was suffering from regular false labor pains. So on 22nd of December, after induction in ARM, Charanpreet delivered a baby boy at 2:40 a.m. And this baby was born in a gasping condition. The pediatricians tried to resuscitate the baby but failed, and the baby was declared dead at 3:10 a.m. Now at 3:15, Charanpreet started bleeding. She was shifted to the OT where IV saline drip, blood substitutes, oxygen was started. Intensive examination of the genitalia was carried out, but but no tear was located. Sorry. Relatives were then asked to arrange 2 units of blood for transfusion, and the blood transfusion was started at 4:15 a.m. Now, a senior gynecologist and a general surgeon were also called in for consultation, who reached the nursing home at 4 a.m. They also conducted necessary tests but could find no apparent reason for the bleeding. And the patient was referred to PGI for uterine artery embolization. Nurses, but the anesthetist did not accompany the patient, and he went to PGI ahead of the patient and took the patient personally to the septic labor room. But here the physician in charge declared her brought dead. And here the State Commission awarded compensation of 20 lakhs to be paid by the appellants. Now there may be genital tract injuries and they also need to be managed. Now there was a case regarding the genital tract injuries where a plaintiff sued a regional hospital alleging that following the birth of the baby, the hospital failed to take sufficient steps to stop a significant PPH on time. Suturing, vaginal packing were all unsuccessful, and after approximately losing 1.5 liters of blood, the patient was moved to the theatre. Now here the repair was a very difficult one, lasted almost 2 hours, and the operative findings revealed a large perineal hematoma, a second-degree perineal tear, and a right paravaginal tear. Now the plaintiff said that the patient had to suffer an unnecessarily traumatic experience. An extensive amount of blood transfusion had to be given, and this left her extremely traumatized and suffering a significant ongoing psychological injury. Now, the expert who came on behalf of the plaintiff did not say that any of the steps which were taken were wrong, but was critical of the speed at which those steps were undertaken. And it was said that in case the patient had been shifted to the OT 36 minutes earlier, the blood loss would have been less. So the court held that the hospital had followed the approved practice at the time, and the judge believed that, yes, in case the patient had been taken to the theatre sooner, she would have suffered less blood loss and probably less of psychiatric trauma. But this was all speculative, and the hospital was not negligent. And here the case was dismissed. Now, this is a very, very important checklist which every doctor needs to have in their labor room or the OT. And this is a PPH documentation where this needs to be filled up. Time of call out, who called out, who was the obstetric consultant, the anesthetic consultant, and the nurse who attended, and what was the time when they arrived. Then whether CBC cross-matching coagulation screen was done. What time? Placenta delivered, yes or no? A urinary catheter with urometer, what was the volume at and at what time? What was the pulse and BP, and note down the time. This is a list of all the uterotonics and what was the time when they were given. What time the oxygen was given. Then what was the time when the patient was transferred to the theater, the mechanical maneuvers done, and the decision for hysterectomy taken. So this is a very, very important checklist which should be kept by everybody, because this is the one that is going to save you from litigations. Now, appropriate communication with the patient is vital in preventing litigations, and you need to communicate to the patient due knowledge of the nature of the problem anticipated, the probability of its occurrence, the possible consequences should also be deliberated upon. Information provided to the patient should be factually correct and should be documented. Promising a favorable outcome increases the probability of litigations and should be avoided. On the contrary, the patient should be made aware of all the possible complications that could occur. It is imperative to adhere to the standard operating protocols, and failure to do so can invite lawsuits. Evidence-based guidelines and protocols need to be followed. And in times of acute emergency, it is justifiable that you deviate from the standard operating protocols, but the reasons for doing so should be clearly documented. Now, in one of the cases of Resham Bhargav versus Super Speciality Hospital, the patient had atonic PPH after a cesarean. The uterotonics were given, sutures were applied, but bleeding was not controlled. So after taking informed consent, subtotal hysterectomy was performed. Blood and the products were transfused to treat the hypovolemic shock. Now, once the case went to court, the doctor pleaded that this was a life-saving procedure and all the standard operating protocols were followed as enumerated in our textbooks. So the court stated that hysterectomy is attempted as a last resort and a life-saving measure. And the decision to perform hysterectomy, though devastating for the patient, should not be delayed in cases of hemodynamic instability. And the case was dismissed in favor of the doctor. A flow chart for the management of PPH should be available in the labor room and OT for all the healthcare workers to follow. Failure to book blood and blood products can lead to a suboptimal fetal and maternal outcome, which in turn leads to patient grievances. So blood and blood cross-matching needs to be done for every high-risk pregnancy, and I would say for every woman in labor. And consent for blood transfusion needs to be taken separately. PPH drills should be conducted. Updated PPH kit should be available in the hospitals. And a rush team of senior and experienced doctors should be formulated, which can support the practitioner in times of emergency. Anesthetist and intensivist should be available in the hospital at all times. Now, what has been documented has been done, and what has not been documented has not been done. So incomplete and imperfect documentation is an important factor leading to litigations. A procedure or a therapy performed but not documented is as good as not done. And documentation includes the date, time, and signature. Now, the records of the treating doctor, anesthetist, and the nursing staff with respect to the timing and specifics of the treatment given, and the notes should be legible. The risk management includes the assessment of the risk factor throughout the pregnancy and delivery, whether the patient is anemic or there is hydramnios or there is multiple pregnancy, macrosomic baby, preeclampsia, and expert opinion of a fellow practitioner can be obtained. Now, once you have identified the risk factor, now steps should be taken for controlling and monitoring them. A no-blame culture should be cultivated in the hospital so that each person learns from another person's experience. And in case of a postpartum hysterectomy, it is prudent to take a second opinion from an experienced practitioner, as this surgery has irreversible consequences. This opinion of a second practitioner should be duly documented in the case records. So in case of an emergency, no consent is required. However, always document the decisions which you have taken in an emergency and the reasons for taking them. Wherever possible, a prior informed consent should be obtained, and the patient should be duly informed of all the possible complications. Now, in case the consent is to be taken while the patient is in labor, it should be in between the contractions when the pain has subsided. So in a cesarean, the consent for cesarean, anesthesia and blood transfusion needs to be taken separately. Now, this is a very important aspect of PPH, and that is a transfer to a higher or a tertiary center.
Excuse me,
In
Madam
one of the
Sumitra.
cases,
Madam Sumitra, can you please mute yourself? Sumitra Chauhan, madam, please mute yourself.
in Dr. S. Mangyakasi
प्लीज
versus
आप अपने को म्यूट कर लीजिए. डॉक्टर सुमित्रा चौहान अपने को म्यूट कर लीजिए प्लीज.
In Dr. S. Mangyakarsi versus M. Vijay Kumar, Jayanti was admitted in the hospital for a third delivery, and she delivered a live female baby at 2:57 p.m. Now, at about 4:30 p.m., the doctor informed the husband that the wife was bleeding profusely, and this could not be arrested, and therefore she had to be another nursing home, another hospital, and to call a taxi for this. Now, within 5 minutes of a departure in the taxi, the blood shot up into the IV fluid bottle, compelling the husband to bring the patient back. The doctor removed the IV fluids even though the patient was bleeding profusely. Thereafter, the patient was rushed. She reached the hospital at 5:50 p.m., where she was declared dead. The complainant came to know through the notes that there was atonic PPH. So here the complainant alleged that the doctor did not have preparation to deal with any emergency situation, and this should be construed as negligence. And she sent the patient in a critical condition in a taxi without any medical aid or assistance, which shows the utter carelessness, negligence of duty, ignoring the value of life, and requested for a 10 lakh compensation. Now here the doctor pleaded that there were 3 more patients in labor, and hence nobody could accompany the patient. Both the ambulances were unavailable on that particular day. There was no blood bank, and hence blood could not be arranged. But she had exercised all the reasonable care and skill and had not violated any protocol. But the court stated that no positive steps for blood transfusion or stepwise devascularization or hysterectomy had been taken. Had the doctor taken steps and failed in that attempt, we would say that there was no fault on her part. And any prudent doctor would have sent at least a trained nurse who was available in the nursing home with the patient. And every life is a precious one. And that too, when a patient was in critical condition, preference should have been given to that particular patient, making alternative arrangements for the remaining patients who were safe, which the doctor failed, and this would be construed as medical negligence. And 2 lakh of compensation had to be paid by the doctor. So the first of all in transferring the patient is that the doctor needs to take a decision that yes, we have to transfer this patient. We are unable to manage the patient at our center. Patient or a guardian needs to be done. Stabilize and prepare the patient for transfer in case the relatives agree. Now, where should the patient be transferred? The choice should be given to the patient or relatives, because there's been a case where the doctor transferred the patient to Apollo Hospital. A 10 lakh bill was given over to the patient, and he said that I don't have money to pay. I was sent by the doctor, and ultimately the court made the doctor pay the bill. And in yet another case, the patient was transferred over to a government hospital, and the relative said that we had enough money to pay, and why were we sent over to a medical college or a government hospital? So a written informed consent is required from the patient because this process involves additional risks and expenses. And in case of refusal, always document it. When transferring, signatures need to be taken along with the date and time from the patient, husband, relatives, or any witness. Confirm the availability of an operation theatre, doctor who is willing to accept this case, and whether the hospital has an ICU with a ventilator. For transfer, an ambulance needs to be arranged, and this should be equipped with oxygen monitoring devices, advanced life support devices, and life-saving medicines. And the patient should be transferred along with the IV fluids and the ongoing resuscitation measures. At least two personnel, a trained doctor or nurse, needs to accompany the patient in the ambulance till the patient has reached the other facility. And these accompanying persons must be suitably trained in critical care, airway management, and life support. They should be able to anticipate the problems and manage them during transfer. Now, before transferring, always ensure that the airway, breathing, and circulation are maintained, and the patient should be kept warm. So the most important aspect during a critical care, it should not be broken. Status of vital signs preceding transfer need to be noted, documenting a continuing medical care during transfer, and handing over the patient and case history to the new facility. Now, the detailed information which needs to go over is the case history of the patient, the clinical condition, ongoing treatment, what are the reasons for transfer, mode and timeline for transfer. All this needs to be provided to the new facility, and you have to take an acknowledgement. Hastily done transfer increases the mortality and morbidity and invites legal issues. Any deficiency would be considered as negligence by the court. A bleeding patient in shock should be transferred with pneumatic anti-shock garment because this shows your care and saves you in the court of law. Proper care and caution are required while transferring the patient, as the responsibility of the patient during transfer lies on the hospital and the doctor who is transferring the patient. And a transfer is considered negligent if it is to cover a negligent act or for ulterior motives, or the transfer is to less than a tertiary care center or to a less trained and experienced doctor. So if all the precautions were taken and the patient still died during transfer, the practitioner would not be held responsible. However, non-referral and delay in referring will be considered as negligence. A death on an operating table has got medical, social, and legal implications, and this will come in the panel. Document the cause of death only if you are sure of the cause. Now, the consequences of a PPH can be, there may be a damage to kidney, to the brain, to the liver. There may be acute respiratory distress syndrome. There may be necrosis of tissues in the extremities, potentially requiring amputation, and even multi-organ failure. So all these are going to invite the litigations. So the patient has to prove that the doctor owed a duty of care, proving that the care fell below the applicable standard, demonstrating that they suffered harm, and proving that they are entitled to compensable damage. Now, the compensation can be demanded for a lifelong health care, medical expenses, lost income and benefits, the pain and suffering which the patient underwent, disability, and even loss of consortium in case there is death of the patient. So a professional indemnity is mandatory for a medical professional. Following a WHO surgical safety protocol of a timeout is very, very important. The WHO protocol for usage of tranexamic acid needs to be followed. Now, the golden hour is the term often used in trauma or emergency care to suggest that an injured or a sick person must receive definitive treatment within the first 60 minutes from the time of injury or the appearance of symptoms, and the morbidity and mortality are affected if care is not instituted within the first hour after injury. Negligence on your part. Now, this golden hour in PPH is divided into 3 parts of 20 minutes each. The first 20 minutes represents the medical treatment, fluid replacement, identification, and management of the main cause of bleeding. Next 20 minutes are for performing mechanical maneuvers like intrauterine tamponade, uterine compressive sutures, and pelvic vascular ligatures. And the last 20 minutes are for non-conservative surgical techniques like obstetric hysterectomy. Now, to summarize, the medico-legal aspects of PPH where you can be litigated against is failure to detect and treat anemia during the antenatal period, not practicing active management of the third stage of labor, failure or delay in diagnosis and assessment of the blood loss, delay in initiating the treatment, that is, you have lost the golden hour, PPH drills not conducted, PPH kits lacking products, deviation from the standard operating protocols and that the doctor lacks the skills, failure of consultant supervision, improper communication, that is, factual information has not been imparted, promising a favorable outcome, incomplete and imperfect documentation. Whenever the teamwork is inefficient, organizational failure is there. Lab results have not been received in time, failure to arrange blood, failure to follow the guidelines of transferring the patient to a tertiary setup timely, and audits when not done in the hospital, because this is going to cut down the learning of the doctors. So time lapse should not be counted in minutes. One has not lost 1 minute, but 60 seconds. And no amount of blood from any blood bank is better and safer than her own blood. Hence, be prompt in saving every drop of blood. Becoming a doctor is getting riskier day by day. These are the references from where I have taken the talk. And thank you very much for a patient hearing.